Good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. Well. Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Daring Dialogues and welcome to Black Table Talk. So you can share this broadcast and you can hashtag Black Table Talk to let people know that you are involved in a conversation about Blackness, Black people, Black history. Good morning to each and every one of you. Good morning, Lady Barbara. Good morning, Lady Latoya. Good morning, Deacon Henry. Good morning, Lady Judy. Good morning to our audiences around the world, and good evening to our audiences around the world, depending on where you are. I noticed that I am getting a lot of followers from the UAE, so I want to say hello to you all. That is an interesting group of followers. I have to do some more study on the UAE so I can speak to what's happening there. But good morning, everyone. Welcome. Today we are talking, as you all know from our Daring Dialogue segments, we are talking about Black history, Black issues, the Black family, anything that is Black. All right. Particularly what is happening with Black Americans here in the United States. All right. So, not just the Americas at large. We know there is South America, Central America, and North America, right? And then there's us, the United States. So, when people say the Americas, just understand that they're talking about all of those parts of the Americas, not just the United States. We are continuing our read of the definitive history of racist ideas in America, written by Ibram X. Kendi, stamped from the beginning. This is a really excellent book, and it's to me, it's he can call it definitive because he is literally tracing all of the racial ideas, how they got started, who was writing about different things, who was forming the world's opinion about Black people and Blackness all over the world, and how that impacted Black Americans as we know it today. So he started all the way back before 1619, before the laws in the Americas, before what was happening in England. And we're now looking at something that I think is very important because he's talking about the Salem witch trials. And if you know anything about what's happening right now, literally what's happening right now in religious circles, is there's a whole lot of talk about witches. There's a whole lot of talk about witchcraft. There's a whole lot of talk about Christian witches and what does that mean? And I'm concerned because I'm seeing some of the same rhetoric that was used in the 1600s to condemn people and murder them under suspicion that's being used right now today to just demonize people without understanding how these terms were used before to demonize people. And so if we're not careful, we will actually wind up doing some of the same things that were done in the past in terms of accusing people of something based on our own understanding or our own perception. And then we'll find ourselves in the place of the people shouting, crucify them, because we lack understanding. All right. Because here is the problem with this. Everything that is being labeled as witchcraft or demonic is not necessarily either of those. I know that just threw some people off. So we're gonna go back and I'm gonna read a couple things again before we go forward in the reading in this book today. Then we're going to go to Spare the Kids, all right, which is talking about the souls of Black children. And again, it also has to deal with things that we have been taught or things that we have been told that is a part of our culture that is not a part of our culture. All right. So it's important to understand where these patterns come from of beating your children into oblivion. All right. That was not a part of our culture. But there are entire schools of thought that say that Black children should be beat more than any other child. There are schools of thought. There are people who actually think that beatings for Black children is a must and is a necessity. But they don't think that about other children. So we gotta do some digging. If you're a parent on here, I encourage you to get this book, Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. All right. So we're going to dig into this some more as well. But let me go back to this topic of the Salem witch trials. As I was praying last week, the Lord began to deal with me about some of these terms that have been going on. And he began to kind of show me a comparison of how in the past, I don't know how many of you, maybe grew up in a Black neighborhood, but I know there were in my neighborhood, there were people in our neighborhood that we called, what do we call them? We called them root workers. Has anybody ever heard that term? Root workers. Root workers. Yes. Okay, Lady Barbara has heard that term. Yes. Yes. Okay. In our community, root workers were seen as people who dabbled in some form of what they called white magic or witch doctor. All right. And you could go to this person and they could actually, they would give you some kind of concoction. Sometimes it was, people who had ailments in their body. They would go to this person and they would give them a concoction to take. I didn't go this. I'm just telling you from my neighborhood understanding and things that people would share and talk about. So they would go to this person. They were known as kind of like the neighborhood person who could give you a concoction for something, and that concoction could cure your body. And then there would be other people in your neighborhood who maybe were not root workers, but they were using concoctions because they felt like there was some sort of supernatural property to it. All right. They felt like if I take this, then my husband will return, or if I take this, my enemies won't attack me, or if I take something and I sprinkle it around my door, then people who are trying to harm me or do something evil against me or whatever, that they would not be able to come near me. So there were kind of like two different schools of thought going on. And as I was praying, it was like God was bringing me back to this particular childhood memory. And he said, many of the people that were being called root workers were actually just herbalists. Now, how many of you have heard that term? Herbalist. Show of hands. Has anyone heard the term herbalist? All right. So Usually, when you hear the term herbalist, all right, it's usually related to someone in what we would call the dominant society or the white community. It's root working. The point I'm trying to make, Lady Judy says yes, she's heard. The point I'm trying to make is on one side of the culture is called root working. And it is given this sort of how can I put it? It's given this sort of mysterious, like, oh my gosh, this person is working some sort of evil. But on the other side of the culture, we understand it as herbalists or herbalism, or people who know how to work with herbs to produce a natural remedy for something. Yes, Lady Barbara, but it's the same. This is the point I want to get to. It's the same. Someone on one side of the coin has demonized it and said it's evil, whereas the dominant society has taken what was deemed as evil and they have just recoined it as herbalists. And now if you go into a store, you go into the bookstore, you see whole sections on herbalists and home remedies and natural cures and all of, and they're making money off it. Yes, they are, Lady Barbara. So I was in the Christian bookstore earlier this week, and what do I run across? I run across a whole book. I took a picture of the cover. I have to find it in my photo archives. But I took a picture of the cover because it said, something about the biblical use of herbs and the cures and all this, and it was just using scripture to talk about the healing property of these particular herbs. Now, our ancestors were demonized for understanding how these things worked. Matter of fact, they were demonized by some of the same people who are now producing books about it and calling it biblical and scriptural. So this is what I'm saying. I'm saying that we have to be careful and look at what is being labeled what and why. And that's from the secular standpoint all the way into the religious. All right. Now, are there some practices that are definitely demonic? Yes. But we have to stop labeling everything as demonic simply because we don't have an understanding. Okay. So I want to back up a little bit because I want us to go back and look at how the Salem witch trial started. How did the Salem witch trial start? And I want you all to share this broadcast because there are a lot of people using the language and terminology that led to the Salem witch trials, and they don't even realize how they're being used to demonize people and call them witches and label them, which ultimately leads to mass hysteria, which ultimately leads to people being killed innocently over an accusation or a suspicion. All right. So let me go back with this gentleman by the name of Cotton Mather and his father, Increase Mather. Exactly. Get an understanding before labeling. All right. So remember, Cotton Mather and his father, Increase Mather, both white Englishmen, they preached a lengthy series first on devils in 1693. All right. Samuel Parris, Parris, a Salem minister, preached endlessly about the devils in their midst. So at first, they were just preaching about devils, right? At first, they had this very abstract idea of devils in their midst. And on one dismal day in February 1692, Paris anxiously watched his 9-year-old daughter and 11-year-old niece suffer from what they described as chokes, convulsions, and pinches. As their condition worsened, the minister's condition worsened too. It dawned on Paris, these girls have been bewitched. So all of this started out of someone preaching on devils. Then their daughters were having some kind of spiritual fit or spiritual conniption. All right. And because it kept happening, they automatically came to this conclusion of that they had been bewitched. They could have been suffering from an epileptic seizure, but it was something that was spiritualized. All right. Then it says, while prayers rose up like kites in Salem and nearby towns, the Salem witch hunt began. The number of afflicted and accused people spread over the next few months, swelling the public uproar and turning public attention, because remember, there was political strife going on at the time, and this Salem witch hunt, this hunt for an invisible devil, this hunt for a religious evil, turned the attention away from what was happening politically. So while people were being jacked over politically, they came up with a religious lie. Sounds like we in 2019. They came up with a religious lie to distract from what was happening politically, to take people's mind and eyes off of that, to have them start focusing on this religious lie that they had concocted. And in nearly every instance, I want you to get this piece. In nearly every instance of these cases, because I actually looked in my library that I finally got a chance to unpack some of it. And I actually have 2 books on the Salem witch trials and all of the cases that were being discussed. All right. In every instance of these cases, the devil, in quotes, who was preying upon these innocent white Puritans was always described as black. I want y'all to get that, because it went from this religious group preaching about devils in the abstract, to now all of a sudden devils have a color. Black America, y'all better hear me today. Black Christians, y'all better hear me today. All right. It went from witches to devils. And then the devils had a color. They weren't spiritual anymore. They weren't spirits anymore. The devils had a color. They were always described as black. One Puritan accuser described the devil as a little black bearded man. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to you today. Another one described it as a black thing of a considerable bigness. So a big black thing was a devil. Some of y'all gonna get that in a moment, because you can't figure out why the culture keeps demonizing certain people. I'm telling you why. A black thing jumped in one man's window. These are actual accounts, descriptions of what was happening. The body was like that of a monkey, the observer added. One had a feet like a cock's, but the face much like a man's. So since the devil represented criminality, and since criminals in New England were said to be the devil's operatives, the Salem witch hunt began to ascribe a black face to criminality. And this ascribing remains to this day. This is why you have to check people at the door with their doctrine. This is why you have to examine what people are telling you about what's evil. You have to check it at the door. Because what I am noticing, especially amongst evangelical Christianity right now, is I'm noticing that everything that is being done on the Black faith side is being demonized or not spiritual, or they don't really know what they're talking about, because many of us are not going along with what this administration is putting out. That is ungodly. So you have to be careful, all right? You have to be careful about the labels that are being espoused right now, the wording. You have to listen to the language of what people are saying, and don't just take everything at face value. Cotton Mather's friends were appointed judges. Remember, his friends were appointed the judges. So you have the religious side working to demonize Blackness. Then you have the preacher's friends becoming the judges. Again, sounds like 2019. Including merchant John Richards, who had just officiated at Mather's wedding. In a letter to Richards on May 31st, 1692, Mather expressed his support for capital punishment. So the preachers are preaching about devils. Their friends become the judges. Their friends agree with them about capital punishment. All right. The Richards court executed Bridget Bishop on June 10th, the first of more than 20 accused witches to die. There was no evidence ever found, by the way, of these people actually being witches. The accused up north in Andover, Massachusetts, confessed that the Black Devil Man compelled them to renounce their baptism and sign his book. They rode poles to meetings where as many as 500 witches plotted to destroy New England, the accused confessed. Hearing about this, Cotton Mather sniffed out, quote unquote, a hellish design of bewitching and ruining our land. Mather ventured to Salem for the first time to witness the executions on August 19, 1692. He came to see the killing of George Burroughs, the supposed general of the Black Devils of New England Army of Witches. Burroughs preached Anabaptist ideas of religious equality. So, George Burroughs, who was preaching about equality for people, was designated as the ringleader of witches and executed. I want you guys to understand that we're going to see a repeat of this. So this man was preaching equality, and because of who was in power at the time, who was in control of religious thought, and who was in control of the courts at the time, who was actually friends with the people in control of religious thought, this man was deemed a witch because he was preaching equality, and he was executed. He was preaching the kinds of ideas that bred anti-racism in Germantown. We cannot have people preaching that Black people are equal. No, because that is witchcraft. Some of y'all gonna get that later today. Oh no. No. We cannot have our preachers preaching that black people are equal to white people. Therefore, you must be dealing in witchcraft because you want equality for all people. So you must be a witch. And we have to resolve this problem. Mather watched Burroughs plead his innocence at the execution site and stir the very great number of spectators when he recited the Lord's Prayer, something the judges said that witches could not do. Anybody honoring George Burroughs for Black History Month? George Burroughs died. George Burroughs was executed for preaching about equality amongst human souls. The black man stood and dictated to him, Burroughs' accusers shouted, trying and failing to calm the crowd. Mather heard the ticking time bomb of the spectators sounding like the unruly masses during the 1689 revolt. As soon as Burroughs was hanged, also known as lynching, Mather sought to quell the passions of the crowd by reinscribing the executive policies of his ruling class into God's law. I want you to understand, they lynched this man because he was preaching equality. They had a public gathering, execution, hanging, also known as lynching, because this preacher was preaching about equality. Tell me what's different in 2019. Just tell me. Because even today, even in 2018, we're still finding Black activists or the sons of Black activists being hung from trees in their backyard. Remember, he preached, the devil often transformed himself into an angel of light. Mather clearly believed in the power of religious and racial transformation. Listen, from black devils to white angels with good or bad intentions. The fervor over witches soon died down. Because what was this fervor about? This fervor was about distracting from what was happening politically at hand. But even after Massachusetts authorities apologized, even after they reversed the convictions, and even after they provided reparations in the early 1700s, Mather never stopped defending the Salem witch trials because he never stopped defending the religious, class, slave-holding, gender, and racial hierarchies that was reinforced by the trials. These hierarchies benefited the elites like him, or as he continued to preach even after there was an apology given, reparations, etc. They knew that they had murdered innocent people, but this man continued to preach that what they had done was in accordance with the law of God. And Cotton Mather viewed himself or presented himself as the defender of God's law, the crucifier of any non-Puritan, African, Native American, poor person, or woman who defied God's law by not following the rules of submission. I need y'all to listen to that. Listen. In his eyes, if you were non-Puritan, if you were African, if you were Native American, if you were poor, or if you were a woman who supposedly did not submit, you were eligible for murder. Just take you on out of here. Exactly. In other words, you must bow to white religious supremacy. Because remember, this is a belief system. It was a belief system and is a belief system. So, sometime after the witch trials, maybe to save their black faces from accusations of devilishness and criminality, listen, a group of enslaved Africans during that time who basically said, listen, they around here killing folks because they got a black face. A group of Africans who were enslaved formed, quote unquote, the Religious Society of Negroes in Boston. It was one of the first known organizations of African people in colonial America. Let us form a society that says we are not them. In 1693, Cotton Mather drew up the society's list of rules. So even though it's called the Religious Society of Negroes, it's still being overseen by a white supremacist. And again, how is this different from 2019? Cotton Mather himself drew up the society's list of rules and prefaced it by a covenant. We, the miserable children of Adam and Noah, freely resolve to become servants of that glorious Lord. This is what they had to recite. Woo, Father God. They had, in order to join this society, they had to recite, we, the miserable children of Adam and Noah, freely resolved to become servants of that glorious Lord. And what he was really saying is, y'all are resolving to become servants of us. And how we do religion. Two of Mather's rules were instructive. Members were to be counseled by someone wise and of English descent. Wow. Just let that sink in. I look at a lot of organizations right now that claim to be pro-African American or pro-Black. And then I'm looking at what is over you and what is the leadership over you. And who gave you your marching papers and who gave you your acceptance. Because according to Cotton Mather, you could be a part of the Religious Society of Negroes if you were counseled by a wise person of English descent. Here's the other one. And they were not to afford any shelter. And this is where becoming complicit with the system comes in from the Religious Society of Negroes. Number one, they had to be overseen by a wise and English descent servant. And number two, they could not give shelter or they could not give sanctuary to anyone who had run away from their masters. Exactly. It was meritorious manumission with a little bit of religious dogma attached to it. So you could almost join this society and kind of be free from the attacks that was happening on other Black people. You could be free from attack from white people if you did two things. Have the oversight or the approval of a white person counseling you. And if somebody Black ran to you for help in this system, you could not give them shelter. I think there's a lot of people who still belong to the Religious Society of Negroes and they just don't know it yet. So the Black people running away from their masters, trying to escape enslavement, if they ran into one of these Religious Society Negroes, they were going to be turned in. It's just funny to me how similar things are happening right now in our culture. They were going to be turned in as an escapee from the system by an enslaved Negro who had now been given kind of a special privilege of immunity from these kinds of attacks. So in exchange for us giving you immunity under this society, you agree to not harbor anybody trying to escape to freedom. Oh, and you let us wise white people teach you. Meeting weekly, some members of the society probably delighted in hearing mass. All right. So, yeah, they were content with being enslaved, right? They were content with being a part of this religious society as long as their souls were being ascribed whiteness. So this particular group of people were not really interested in freedom. They were interested in a safe enslavement. And again, how is that any different from some of the things we see and hear happening in 2019? There are some that are free, that are comfortable with a safe enslavement. Don't ask for too much. Don't try to get free. Don't ask for more than what we're getting right now. You're rocking the boat. Don't be talking about no reparations. Because we are safe society Negroes and we're happy with what we have right now. There are some that don't really care about what's happening to the mass of African Americans in this country. They don't care. And historically, we see why they don't care, because some of them have actually signed up for some of these kind of covenants. So some probably rejected these racist ideas and used the society to mobilize against enslavement. No wonder the religious society of Negroes did not last. Few Africans wanted to be Christians at that time, though that would change in a few decades, especially these kinds of Christians. And not many masters were willing to let their captives become Christians because, unlike in other colonies, correct, Prophet Jonathan, unlike in other colonies, there was no Massachusetts law stipulating that baptized slaves did not have to be freed. Because they knew that according to actual scripture, if a slave was baptized, he was supposed to be your brother and your equal in Christ, and you were supposed to free him. But Massachusetts had a law against that. So Massachusetts law said, even if they did become baptized, we still don't have to free them, because we only say over here, only their souls are freed, but we have the right to keep their bodies enslaved. Throughout the social tumult of the 1690s, Mather obsessed over obtaining the social hierarchies by convincing the lowly that God and nature had put them there, whether it applied to women, to children, enslaved Africans, or poor people. So there was a doctrine, and there still is a doctrine, that if you're poor, God must have meant for you to be poor. And so there's no need for you to try to be something else, because whatever your lot in life is, God intended it. And therefore you should not try to move out of the class or move or become upwardly mobile, because this is the place that you were born in. And therefore this must be your lot in life. Totally disregarding the fact that whole economic systems were intentionally created to make some people poor and some people rich. In A Good Master Well Served, 1696, he presumed that nature had created a conjugal society between husband and wife, a parental society between parent and child, and lowest of all, a hierarchical society between master and servant. So he preached a whole doctrine about God created a master servant structure for life. Society, he said, became destabilized when children, women, and servants refused to, quote, accept their station. So he just slipped that right in there. He was like, oh yeah, God meant for husband and wife, God meant for parent and child, and God meant for master and servant. That's how sneaky this doctrine is. Because unfortunately, there are still people who are believers or Christians who actually believe this, that some people are meant to be masters and some people are meant to be servants, and we should not try to change that dynamic. Mather compared egalitarian resistors to that old ambitious devil who wanted to become the all-powerful God. So how do people get demonized for wanting equal rights? Well, you simply compare them to the devil. You simply say the devil wanted to elevate himself and exalt himself above God. And what you're doing is you're trying to exalt yourself above what we feel is your God-given place, which is beneath us. Oh, but when the tables turn, because they will turn, when the tables turn and you are the minority and people use this same doctrine on you to say, hey, well, God turned the tables and I guess you're supposed to be the underclass. So why are you trying to not be the underclass? Remember, you said that God ordained for some people to be poor and some people to be rich. So now that you're poor, why do you want to be rich? Now that you're poor and down and out, why do you want to change that? That's how demonic this doctrine is. And people buy into it. All right. So he's saying, because you don't accept the station that we say, according to our doctrine, is what God intended for your life, because you won't accept that, now you're a devil. Now we equate you to the devil. They equated Black people who wanted equal rights to the devil, by the way. They equated Martin Luther King to the devil. Because in their minds, God, quote unquote, ordained you to be in a certain position to serve them as the quote unquote master race. So you're messing up a balance that we enjoy. And if we enjoy it, of course, we're going to say that God ordained it. If we're the ones on top, of course, we're going to say that it was meant to be. Lastly, for today, and then we're going to go to our second book. This line of thinking became Mather's everlasting justification of social hierarchy. The ambitious, lowly, those who were lowly, in his mind, resembled Satan. And his kind of elites resembled God. So, if you were poor, if you were struggling, if you were trying to do better in life for yourself, Cotton Mather and many preachers like him during that time viewed you as demonic. You were seen as the devil because according to their doctrine, God put you in that position to serve them. And so for you to move out of that position of servitude was to go against God's will. And still today, we have actual people who actually believe this. And this is why many of them fight things like equality. Because in their mind, you are supposed to serve them. You are created by God to be in a low position in order to make them the masters over your fate. Yes, it is the accept what God allows doctrine. But if they were on the other side of that God allowing, then it would be revolution. And you better believe that they understand, many of them understand that they're going to be on the other side of that doctrine. Hence, the militia. Hence, organized resistance. Hence, stockpiling guns and food and all these other things. Because they have a very clear understanding of how this doctrine works. And when you're no longer on the beneficial side of this doctrine, then you know it's going to be a problem. All right. Lastly, and I'm going to move on to the next book. He says, this is what he told the enslaved Africans at the time. And when I read this to you, you're going to have heard this before, because there are politicians who have actually said this in recent years. Cotton Mather informed the enslaved Africans in his sermon. He said, you are better fed and better clothed and better managed by far than you would be if you were your own men. In other words, slavery has been good for you. I mean, we feed you, we clothe you, we control you, we manage you. And you're far better off than you were having your own independence. His insistence that urbane American slavery was better than barbaric American freedom was not unlike Gomez Llanes de Zurara's estimation that Africans were better off as slaves in Portugal than they had been in Africa. Sounds like control naturally and spiritually. Yes, sir. Do not partake in evil and make yourself infinitely blacker than you are already, Mather warned. Mind blown. Do not partake in evil, because remember, the devil gained the color in Massachusetts. He became black. He was no longer spirit. He was no longer some aberration. He was no longer some, idea. The devil became black during the Salem witch trials. You can type that sentence today in hashtag Black Table Talk, Black History Month. Go study. He told these people, don't partake in evil and make yourself infinitely blacker than you are already. You're already black. Don't add more blackness to it by being evil. By obeying, he said, your souls will be washed white in the blood of the Lamb. But if you fail to be orderly servants, then you shall forever welter under intolerable blows and wounds from the devil, your overseer. In sum, Mather offered enslaved Africans two options. You could be righteous. You could be righteous by assimilating whiteness and slavery to God. So you could assimilate whiteness by becoming slaves to God. In other words, serving them would be like becoming God's slave, because you were filling your position in this world by serving them and God's minions. Or you could become a segregated criminal and have your blackness criminalized and become a slave to the devil and the devil's minions. Yeah. We will complete Mather next week. We'll talk about where his writings went next week. But the next time you turn on Christian television, if you choose to turn on Christian television, and they're having one of those marathons, about our nation and righteousness and all of that, the next time you turn on one of those programs, I want you to pay attention to the language that is used when they are talking about our nation. Pay attention. Pay attention to the language that is used when they are talking about anyone who, quote unquote, speaks against our leaders. I want you to pay attention. Then I want you to think back to the language that was used to demonize 20 people and get them murdered because they were all called witches, because a quote unquote black devil was in their midst, getting them to speak out and getting them to want equality for people. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about spare the kids. Why whooping children won't save Black America. We're going to use this as our last piece of reading for today. And we're on the subject of a love whooping. A love whooping. This whole idea that I beat my children or I abuse my children because I love them. Now, that logic does not work when we're talking about domestic violence, does it? If a boyfriend and a girlfriend were sitting next to each other, or a husband and wife in counseling, and the husband or the wife came up and said, I'm beating my spouse because I love them, most of us would cancel the counseling, right? We'd just be like, I'm done. Because we know that does not make sense. Right? Trying to help some of us think this through. So if a husband is in counseling with his wife and he's telling the counselor, I really love my wife and I beat the crap out of her. I bash her head in, I burn her, I throw her downstairs because I really love her. We would be like 911. Officer, right? So why do we use that logic when it comes to children's bodies? Let me continue reading. A disturbing truth has emerged from data. In addition to the threats from trigger-happy police officers and gun-toting citizens who claim to be standing their ground, the safety of Black children is also under peril from the culture of whoopings. This is a public health crisis, and yet many Black people continue to loudly and proudly describe the pain of their own childhood as a sign of strength, a source of humor, and essential to shaping them into the successful people they are today. On top of our cultural attachment to hitting our children, America's complicated history has conditioned us to accept that pain is a necessary part of learning and growing up Black. When I saw the outrage this week, and I'm going to try not to preach, okay? But this subject is very dear to my heart, okay? When I saw this week all these cases of children being made to reenact slavery through schools, taking them on field trips to pick cotton, in case you didn't hear about that. A couple of schools, not just one. This has been happening, not just one, okay? Listen, schools taking children on field trips to cotton fields, having them pick cotton, and having them sing slave songs about loving to pick cotton, and saying it was a Black history lesson. One school here in Virginia. When I saw yesterday a Black child, a guard or a teacher or something, fell on a Black child in school, and when he got up, the child was missing patches of hair out of the back of her head, where 2 of her braids had been ripped out of her scalp. And y'all not mad about that? I don't understand. I am livid. I am outraged by what is happening. But you know what? People have been conditioned to think that Black children need this kind of pain, that it's supposed to be necessary and a part of learning and growing up Black in America. So people have gotten used to Black children being beat up and beat by their own families, that now you got teachers and administrators and school resource officers doing it in schools. See, they have figured out that you too beat your child just like they do. Some of us are going to get that in a moment. And so now people are abusing children in schools. And my advice is always going to be, because I was a teacher for 15 years, my advice is always going to be, get your child out of public school if you can. If you have the financial wherewithal to homeschool your children, homeschool your children. If you have the financial wherewithal to put your child in a proper, accredited private school, do that. But even some of those have issues, because some of them are kicking Black children out for wearing their natural hair out of their scalp. So if you can afford it, homeschool your child. Because what's happening is, whatever it takes. And for some of us, it's going to take some self-sacrifice. It's going to take some sacrifice. It's going to take some sacrifice. It's going to take some sacrifice. But if you're looking at what is being indoctrinated into your child, who's supposed to be your future, that it's supposed to be the seed that you send into the future that's no longer here when you're not here, that's going to be here when you're not here. I want you to think about what is happening to children in these schools. Because I'm looking at them, and I'm not calling them schools right now. I'm calling them pre-incarceration centers. When your school stops looking like a school and it starts looking like a pre-incarceration center, you might want to take your child out. I'm just trying to help some of us. I'm giving a warning, because some of us still don't get it. They are trying to privatize education. They're trying to fully privatize education. And what does that mean? That means that resources to properly educate your child will be pulled out. And when those resources are pulled out, all right, then another kind of instruction comes in. It becomes less about education and more about punishment, more about keeping children in line. There becomes an increase in how students are disciplined, because students will recognize that they're no longer being taught. And when they recognize they're no longer being taught, they're going to start complaining. And when they start complaining, they're going to be labeled as difficult. And when they're labeled as difficult, they're going to be written up. And when they're written up, a school resource officer is going to be called to your class, to that classroom, and depending on what kind of school resource officer gets to that classroom, your child might be handcuffed, thrown to the ground, pulled out of the class, charged as a juvenile, and given some juvenile detention recommendations. I'm just telling you what's happening because some of y'all still think that this is regular school going on. There's a reason why teachers across the country are striking. They're not just striking for pay. Some of them are striking because the money that is being given to their school districts is not even going to curriculum. It's going to people's salaries, but it's not going to curriculum. It's not going to supplies. It's not going to building maintenance. There was a couple of days here in the Maryland area for this opening school year that the students couldn't even go to school because the buildings were not taken care of. There was no heat in the buildings, so they could not start school on time. I want you to understand that. Yeah. So it is a crisis. Too many people across the color line believe that Black children are inherently problematic and disrespectful thugs. I'm going to say that again because it's true. Too many people across the color line, including Black people, believe that Black children are inherently problematic and disrespectful thugs, the root of society's problems, and are in need of punitive forms of control. Truth be told, if whooping Black children were a prerequisite for white recognition of our humanity and civil rights, and for good Black citizenship and success, then Black Americans really ought to be ruling this country right now. Parenting based on beatings has not led our people to the promised land. Parenting based on beatings has not led our people to the promised land, but we continue with the status quo. As we wage war on the bodies of our children and their emotional well-being, all the measures of health, of wealth, of educational achievement, and general progress tell a stark story. The truth is that racist America is determined to keep Black communities under siege by locking up and even killing our future leaders. And many parents have become complicit in this because you don't seem to understand that your beating and abusing your child is actually putting them in danger of this exact system that you claim to be wanting to keep them from. So you're actually helping this system out because you're choosing not to do what's actually called discipline. And if you go look up the word discipline, it does not say anything and it does not mean hitting, striking, beating, slapping, punching. That's not discipline. Discipline actually means instruction. I know. Instruction takes time. Instruction means that you might have to repeat yourself more than once. Instruction takes energy that picking up a shoe and throwing it at your child does not. Lastly, and I'm closing for today, to keep on living King's dream and embrace some after-school special idea of color blindness, far too many Black Americans co-sign the dehumanization of our children. We do this every time we hit them. The entrenched belief in whooping children is driven by Black parents' very real fear. The fear is legitimate. The fear is real. But the method is contradicting what you actually want. There's a very real fear about the safety and well-being of children in contemporary America. A Pew Research Center survey published December 2015 found that Black parents worry more than white parents that their children might get shot at some point, either on the streets of an unsafe neighborhood or by the police. The concern is justified, of course. However, the methods that we are employing because we fear what may happen is counterproductive to keeping your children safe. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I have been your host, Shantae Charles. I want to thank you for your time and attention today in our segment for Black Table Talk. If you would like to, you can follow my Facebook page, Black Table Talk, where we are talking about Black people and Black issues on a continuous basis throughout the week. All right. Keep these things in mind. I want you to think about these things. I know we kind of covered a lot, but it's important, again, to understand what people are pushing. Don't just take everything you hear, especially in the religious arena right now, at face value. Ask questions. When someone calls something demonic, or they're calling somebody a witch, or they're calling somebody a witch dealing in witchcraft, ask them, what do they mean? What do you mean? How is that witchcraft? What made you come to that conclusion? Ask questions, all right? And if you have a child, hug your child today. Smile at your child. Tell your child that you're thankful that they are in this world and that they are a reflection of you. Tell your child today how proud you are of them. Don't let someone else be filling the love tank for your child. Fill it yourself. All right? Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light.